The land of the gods does not grant immortality. It is a fire that mercilessly consumes the soul of any mortal who touches its shores. This is the secret of the Undying Lands, a truth so terrible it required a divine ban to protect men from their own deepest desires. The quest to reach it was a temptation so great it caused the downfall of the greatest kingdom of men, an act of pride that makes the lure of the One Ring seem a simple test of will. This is the Chronicle of Valinor, the deathless realm, and the fundamental cosmic law that separates it from Middle-earth. It is a tale that reveals why the land itself is called undying, not because it bestows eternal life, but because only immortal beings can endure its blessed and lethal radiance. For a mortal, the undiluted spiritual intensity of this land would cause their spirit to burn through their physical body at a terrifying rate. It is a swift and agonizing death. To understand this terrible truth, one must first understand the very fabric of creation and the two distinct fates woven into it by the Creator, Ilúvatar. He brought forth two races to inherit the world: the Elves, the firstborn, and men, the followers. Though they walked the same earth, their destinies were eternally severed. The Elves were bound to the world, their spirits, their fear, inexorably tied to the fate of Arda itself. So long as the world endured, so would they, their immortality, a long, slow circle of memory and sorrow. The destiny of men, however, was a mystery. Their spirits were but sojourners in the world, guests within their physical bodies. Therefore, their fate was to experience life with a unique intensity, to love and build and strive with the full knowledge that their time was short. Their end was not an end, but a departure, a release from the circles of the world, to a fate unknown even to the Valar. This was called the gift of men. But the realm of the Valar, Valinor, was not made for such fleeting spirits. It was a land physically and spiritually co-located with Arda, yet imbued with a divine energy far beyond the tolerance of a mortal frame. Here, the very soil, the air, the light itself, was saturated with the power of the godlike Valar who shaped the world. The light of the two trees, Telperion and Laurelin, had soaked into the land for ages uncounted, creating a reality of unbearable holiness and power. For an elf whose spirit and body were of a matched and enduring temper, this land was a paradise. But for a man, it was a forge. The sheer spiritual pressure of the blessed realm would act upon a mortal body like an immense heat, causing the spirit to blaze up with an unnatural intensity, consuming its physical vessel like a moth drawn to a white-hot flame. A mortal might live for a year in Valinor, but they would feel as though a century had passed, their life force burned away until nothing was left but dust. And so the Valar, the guardians of the world, established their ban. It was not an act of jealousy, a hoarding of paradise. It was an act of profound mercy, a quarantine. They forbade mortals from sailing into the uttermost west, not to deny them bliss, but to save them from a self-inflicted, agonizing annihilation born of misunderstanding and desire. But if this land was so lethal to Mengan, why was a ban even necessary? Who would be so foolish as to seek out their own agonizing demise? The answer lies in the slow poisoning of a gift. As ages passed, and the shadow of the first Dark Lord Morgoth corrupted the hearts of men, their unique destiny began to feel not like a gift, but a curse. They saw the endless lives of the elves and grew envious. They looked upon their own mortality and named it the doom of men. They began to fear the unknown that lay beyond death. And in their fear, they began to desire one thing above all else: more time, more life. This fear festered for thousands of years in Middle-earth, but it would find its most fertile and tragic ground in the one place made to be a paradise for men. After the defeat of Morgoth in the War of Wrath, the Valar sought to reward the houses of men who had fought against the darkness. They raised an island from the depths of the great sea, set between Middle-earth and the shores of Valinor itself. It was shaped like a five-pointed star, and its name was Númenor. Those men who settled it, the Dunedain, were blessed beyond all others. Their lifespans were trebled, their wisdom and stature increased, and their island was a haven of peace and prosperity, free from the sickness and shadow of Middle-earth. From their gleaming port cities, their great ships sailed across the world, bringing knowledge to the lesser men of the continent. They were masters of the sea, lords of the world, second only to the elves. For a time, they were content. The elves of Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle off the coast of Valinor, would sail to them, bringing gifts and friendship. The chief of these gifts was a seedling of the White Tree, a living connection to the light of the blessed realm. Yet, one prohibition remained. The Númenorians were masters of all seas, but they were forbidden from sailing so far west that the shores of their own island vanished from sight. The Baron of the Valar still held. At first, this was accepted as the will of the powers who had given them so much, but as the centuries rolled by, the old fear began to creep back into their hearts. Even a life of 300 years must end. They would stand upon the western cliffs of Númenor at sunset, looking out towards the forbidden horizon, and wonder what lay beyond. They began to believe that the Undying Lands held the secret to unending life, and that the Valar were withholding it from them. The gift of men was now fully seen as the doom of men. The friendship with the Elves cooled, for the Númenorians saw in their ageless faces a mocking reminder of their own mortality. They began to divide into two factions: the smaller party of the faithful, who held to the old ways and revered the Valar, and the much larger party of the king's men, who lusted for eternal life and saw the ban as a prison wall. For millennia, this protection held. But what happens when the greatest kingdom of men in history, blessed with gifts beyond all others, begins to see this mercy not as a shield, but as a cage? The breaking point came with the 25th king of Númenor, a man whose pride and power were greater than any who came before him. His name was Ar-Pharazôn the Golden. He was a mighty warrior and a brilliant commander, but his ambition was a bottomless chasm. When he heard that Sauron, the heir of Morgoth, had begun to style himself the king of men in Middle-earth, Ar-Pharazôn was consumed by a jealous rage. He would not suffer a rival. He assembled the greatest military force the world had ever seen, and sailed to Middle-earth to challenge the new Dark Lord. The might of Númenor was so overwhelming, so terrifying in its splendor, that the armies of Sauron deserted him without a fight. Sauron, ever the cunning strategist, saw that he could not win by force of arms, so he chose deception. He humbled himself, offered his submission, and allowed himself to be taken as a prisoner back to the island of Númenor. Ar-Pharazôn, in his arrogance, believed he had utterly vanquished his foe. He did not realize he had just brought the plague onto his ship. He had welcomed the serpent into his garden paradise. Within a mere 3 years, Sauron went from prisoner to the king's most trusted advisor. He played upon Ar-Pharazôn's deepest fear, death. He whispered lies into the king's ear, telling him that the Valar were liars, mere phantoms created to keep Mengs from their true potential. He spoke of another power, a true Lord of the Dark, Melkor, who was the giver of freedom and power. And then, he delivered his masterpiece of deceit. Sauron claimed that the name Undying Lands was literal, that the soil itself bestowed immortality, and that whosoever controlled that land would live forever. The ban of the Valar, he argued, was the ultimate act of tyranny, a lie designed to keep men weak and mortal, while the Valar hoarded eternal life for themselves. He told the king that death was not a gift, but a weapon used by his jailers. The poison took root. Ar-Pharazôn, now growing old and desperate, became a disciple of the dark. The worship of Melkor became the state religion. The faithful were persecuted. The white tree, the last symbol of friendship with Valinor, was hewn down and burned as a sacrifice in the new temple. A great smoke rose from the pyre, shrouding the once shining island in a permanent gloom. A creeping fear had taken root in paradise, and into this fertile ground of doubt, a new master of deception had planted a seed of pure poison. Now, consumed by the terror of his own impending death, Ar-Pharazôn made a final, terrible decision. He would heed Sauron's advice. He would sail west, break the Balin, and wage war upon the Valar themselves. He would seize the Undying Lands by force, and claim eternal life from those who had, in his mind, unjustly denied it to him. For 9 years, the great armament was prepared. The strength and craft of Númenor was bent to a single, blasphemous purpose. The fleet that was assembled was the greatest in the history of the world, a forest of masts and sails that blotted out the horizon. At last, with his life nearing its end, the king boarded his flagship, Alcarandas, and gave the order. The Golden and Black fleets set sail. They passed the westernmost capes of Númenor and into the forbidden seas. The world grew unnaturally silent around them. The water was as still as glass. They sailed on, and a strange weariness fell upon the crews, a deep foreboding that warred with their pride. They breached the shimmering, invisible veil of the ban, and the air itself seemed to change, growing thin and sharp, filled with a light that was both beautiful and painful to behold. Then they saw it. The shores of Aman, the Undying Lands, lay before them. The mountains of the Pelori rose like silent, white-robed giants, and the city of the Elves, Tirion, glittered upon a green hill. It was a sight of such unbearable beauty that many of the soldiers and sailors wept, some in awe and some in terror. But there was no army to greet them. No challenge was issued. The land was utterly silent, waiting. Pharazôn, his heart ablaze with a cocktail of mortal fear and immortal pride, believed the Valar were cowed by his might. He landed his ship upon the shores of Tuna, and clad in his brilliant armor, he stepped out onto the deathless soil, claiming the land for himself. For a single, fleeting moment, he stood there, the conqueror of paradise. And then, nothing happened. The wind did not stir. No challenge was cried. The deathless land simply watched. The king took another step, then another, his bravado beginning to crack, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. For this was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a tomb. But if the king was here, leading his armies into a divine trap, what about the one who had sent him? What about the architect of this entire blasphemy? Where was Sauron? Sauron had not sailed with the fleet. He had remained behind, in the heart of Armenelos, the puppet master watching his finest creation march to its doom. He knew the Valar would not fight men. He knew they would not defile their own land with war. He was counting on them to do something far more drastic. The Valar laid down their guardianship of the world and called upon the one power greater than themselves, Eru Ilúvatar, the Creator. They surrendered their authority, admitting that this rebellion was too great for them to judge or to mend. And Ilúvatar answered. In that moment, the world was changed forever. A great chasm opened in the sea between Númenor and the Undying Lands. The waters, once as calm as glass, rose into mountains of churning chaos and poured into the abyss. Pharazôn and his entire vast army, who stood upon the sacred shores, looked back in horror. They were not granted a swift death. The land itself fell upon them, trapping the great armament under the hills, where they are said to lie imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten until the last battle. But the true price was paid by Númenor itself. The foundation of the island was broken. The holy mountain of the Meneltarma erupted in a final, agonizing plume of fire and steam. And then the sea came for its prize. A wave of impossible size, dark and crowned with foam, rolled over the plains, swallowing the cities, the forests, and the people of the Golden Age. Sauron, in his high temple, met the cataclysm not with fear, but with laughter. He had won. He had used the pride of men to remove his greatest enemies, the might of Númenor and the direct influence of the Valar from the world of Middle-earth, in one single, masterful stroke. His physical body, the fair form he had used to deceive so many, was utterly destroyed in the flood. For any lesser being, this would have been the end. But Sauron was a Maya. His spirit endured. Naked, formless, and stripped of his ability to ever appear beautiful again, a wind of pure malice blew eastward back to Middle-earth. He had paid a terrible price, but the board was now clear. He returned to his old lands, to the Dark Tower of Mordor, and there, slowly, over long years, he forged himself a new body, no longer fair, but an image of pure terror and strength. The fall of Númenor was not his defeat. It was the closing of a trap he had set 1,000 years before. And now, his true enemy was gone. But he was wrong, for not everyone had perished in the drowning of the world. Elendil the Tall and his sons, Isildur and Anarion, had not heeded the lies of Sauron. They led the faithful, those who still revered the Valar and the ancient ways. They had seen the madness in their king's eyes, and had prepared their own fleet, not for war, but for escape. They were cast into the sea before the great wave fell, driven by a storm that was not of this world. The very fabric of the earth was being rewoven, and they were caught in its furious loom. The winds that tore at their sails were a wind of judgment, but also of salvation, pushing them ever eastward. They carried with them more than just their lives. They carried the memory of a light that had been extinguished, the lore of the Edain, and symbols of their heritage, the 7 seeing stones, the Palantiri, and a single precious fruit from the white tree, Nimloth the Fair, saved by Isildur from its felling. After a journey of untold hardship, they were cast upon the shores of Middle-earth. Exiles from a drowned world, they were the last of the Númenorians, bearing the weight of their people's folly and the hope of their people's future. And here, in this new land, they would begin again. In the north, Elendil founded the realm of Arnor. In the south, near the shadow of Mordor, his sons Isildur and Anarion founded the kingdom of Gondor, with its twin cities of Minas Anor and Minas Ithil. They built their cities with the white stone of their memory, an echo of the glory that was lost forever beneath the waves. But the shadow that had consumed their homeland had not been vanquished. It had merely been unbodied, and from the black land of Mordor, the enemy watched. The Dark Lord had lost the war for Númenor's soul, but in so doing, he had cleared the board for a greater war in Middle-earth. Now the last sons of that land stood as a final, defiant challenge. For this is the great theme of Arda, the story that echoes from the music of the Ainur to the final setting of the sun. It is the tale of light against the long shadow, of fleeting beauty against an encroaching dark, of a courage that shines brightest when all other lights have gone out. The saga of the Silmarils, the doom of the Elves, the rise and fall of men all, are but a single chapter in this endless chronicle. The Second Age is now drawing to its bloody conclusion. The last alliance of elves and men is yet to be forged, the great battle upon the slopes of Mount Doom yet to be fought. The Ring of Power waits for its moment upon the stage of history. These are tales still to be told, tragedies and triumphs yet to unfold. The tale is never truly over. It is a world of immense history, of deep lore, and of unforgettable legends. To journey with us through every age of this world, from the first dawn to the final fading, and to ensure you witness every chapter of this epic saga, subscribe now to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles.